Boa noite a todas, todos e todes.
Good evening, everyone. This event is carried out by the Ministry of Tourism through the Law of Incentive to Culture by the Israeli Congregation of São Paulo and the Judaic Academy and the young adults, and the sponsorship of Bemol Itaú, CSN, NGR, and Rosette and Halbert. We thank the interpreters Patricia Mamedi and Anderson Rodrigues and Paloma Bueno, and all the team from CIPI, and all the audience that's watching us here and online. Before we introduce the debaters of the first panel that has as a topic diversity, I think we need a transmitter for Daniel. Anyway, this event has as a topic diversity in Jewish culture and education, gender and sexuality. I will present the organizations involved. MOV 2035 is a group of young adults from CIPI, and it's an incubator of projects of activism, social and communitary, and engages young people from 20 to 35, and it seeks to foster educational solutions that are pluralist and inclusive. HINEMI is one of the commissions of integration of the Israeli Federation of São Paulo, FISSPS, that has the aim of bringing knowledge to and giving voice to LGBTQAI plus in the Jewish community in São Paulo. GAVA is a collective, a Jewish collective, LGBTQAA, and the Institute Brazil Israel that fights for the representative. Rama is a branch of the Jewish camp that is a conservative but promoted the programs in the summer in Israel that inspired a commitment of the Jewish life and develop activities for the next generation of Jewish leaders. And it also we have the young adults and the community of Shalom. And finally, the Jewish Academy that I'm very proud to represent, and it's a branch of the continued education of CIPI that has the goal of building a new place, not to take the Jewish people to Judaism, but to bring Judaism to the Jewish people. And after all these introductions of all the institutions that are here present, now please allow me 2 more minutes to introduce these 4 personalities that are here with us, all of them actively involved in Jewish education. Dr. Daniel Olson is the Director of Strategic Initiatives and Research of the National Commission of Rama. His work includes support to mental health and LGBTQAI plus inclusion. His education, he completed his doctorate in the education in Jewish studies in the NYU in 2020. He received the Howard Weschler Award for emerging studies in the research network of the Jewish education. Rabbi Rogerio Cukierman. He is Master in Jewish Studies by Hebrew Union College and Jewish Education by Hebrew College, the Pluralist Rabbinic Seminar in the region of Boston. His work in his master degree was educating students in towards progressive Jewish ethical sexual ethics. Dr. Raizel Retchman, a psychologist, doctor and master in psychology of education from PUC, São Paulo. She is the educational coordinator of the CP Youth, and is the coordinator of a mobile school and the vice president of the regional college of the regional council of psychology in São Paulo. Noah Hamaoui is a student of social environmental sciences in Oberlin College in the United States, and is a facilitator in the Leadership Academy of Latin America, in addition to being a Madrisha for Colombia and CIPI. And I know that all of them have very extensive CVs. I just gave a brief introduction, I would like to let everyone know that we have interpretation to Portuguese in channel 4, English in channel 1, and you can get the radio receivers at the entrance of the synagogue. We also have translation in libras. And who is online, you have links for the transmission in Portuguese and original audio so that everyone can watch in the way they feel more comfortable. And finally, all the questions of this event, that it will be very interactive. The questions, whoever has a question, you can write the question down. And if you don't have pen and paper, Tati has over here. You just raise your hand, she can get them to you. You can send the questions in writing and we will forward them to the panel. Whoever is online, you can send it on the chat. We will be attentive to include your participation. With that, I pass the floor to you. Does anyone want to start? Good evening, everyone, and welcome, Daniel, Noah, Raizel. We thought of each one of us starting with a brief introduction, saying how does each one see the dimension of LGBTQIA in Jewish education, if it is possible, or actually what room the dimension of LGBTQIA has within Jewish education. So whoever wants to start.
Okay, thank you so much. And it's such an
Well,
honor to be here with you in Sao Paulo. And it's been an incredible honor to meet with some of the LGBTQ people and activists here in Brazil already. And if I only say this, it will have been enough, which is that I send my strength and support to every single person who's working towards greater LGBTQ equality in the Jewish community here in Brazil and in Brazilian society more broadly. What you're doing is incredible and should be supported by everybody. So Rogerio, to answer your question loud and clear, yes, no hesitation, without a doubt, there is room for LGBTQ people and conversations and educational content in Jewish education. And there's actually quite a lot of room for it. And I want to talk about that in 3 different dimensions. First, people. Second, content. And third, politics and advocacy. So first, people. I'm from Sao Paulo, Minnesota, St. Paul, Minnesota, in the United States. I was born in 1990. And I went to an incredible Jewish school called the Talmud Torah Day School of St. Paul. And already in the 90s, I had Jewish studies teachers and homeroom teachers who were openly gay and lesbian. So even though when I was that young, I didn't know that I was gay yet, I knew that my teachers were. I knew that they were accepted into the community. I knew that they were beloved by the community, and I knew that they were incredible educators. So already from a very young age, I felt very fortunate to have those role models, to have those people for me in Jewish education. To be clear, in the 1990s in the United States, this was not very common. I grew up in a pretty unique and special community. So that's one dimension of people. Another is that in the United States, there is an increasingly number of openly gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, and queer Jewish educators. My husband is a congregational rabbi. He went to the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York, and 1/3 of his class was LGBTQ+ in some way. In the Jewish Theological Seminary right now, I was speaking with someone who is gay, who is working as a unit head at one of the Ramah camps this summer, and he told me that maybe half of the class now is openly gay, and that's just in the conservative or Masorti rabbinical seminaries. There are many, many people who are out in school and are serving as Jewish leaders, and more than just rabbis, also Jewish educators and organizational leaders all over the United States are openly gay and are doing for the next generation of kids what my teachers in St. Paul were able to do for me. So that's one dimension. The second is content. I think to be truly inclusive, it's not just enough to have LGBTQ plus people invited into the space. You know, you can sit over there, don't be too loud, do your own thing. The presence of LGBTQ people in a Jewish community and an educational setting also has to affect the content. So let me tell you how I've seen that even this summer in the Ramah camps. A couple weeks ago, I went to Camp Ramah in the Berkshires, which is in New York. And there's a tradition there to hang flags outside of each of the tzrifim, each of the cabins. And my jaw dropped to the floor when I walked onto camp, and it looked like every other cabin had some kind of pride flag. Some the classic pride flag with only 6 colors, some the more contemporary pride flag with brown and black stripes to represent people of color, and blue and pink and white stripes to represent the transgender community. It was so powerful to see this generation of kids excited to hang up those flags. Also in Ramah, we have affinity groups of LGBTQ campers and staff members who have an opportunity to meet together at least once a week to connect with each other, for the older kids to role model for the younger kids, for the staff members who are openly gay or queer or trans in camp to lead conversation. It's really quite remarkable. And beyond Ramah, the innovation within Judaism that's coming from LGBTQ Jewish educators is remarkable to see, and could talk about that for a long time. But the example that I want to present that I think is really special is a yeshiva in Chicago called Svara, which is led by a queer rabbi, B'nai Lappi. And what she's doing is teaching Talmud, especially in the original Aramaic through a queer lens, and being able to open so many new and different interpretations and really advance a general understanding, but informed by queer ideas to a broader audience. That yeshiva is not only open to LGBTQ people, it's open to everyone who is interested in bringing a queer lens to text study. And then finally, the political lens. I think in Jewish education, it's not enough to welcome people. It's not enough to change the content internally. It's also very important to speak out publicly in favor of LGBTQ equality in the broader Jewish community and also in the broader society. And it's been very encouraging, though sometimes disheartening, depending on who it is, to see how different Jewish organizations have reacted to some of the backlash to LGBTQ equality and rights that we've seen in the United States. And some organizations have made a strong stance and have really spoken out against it, are very publicly continue to be in favor of same-sex marriage, of LGBTQ educators being able to work with children without being accused of really horrible things. So I think there's that political dimension to this educational work as well. And that's what I have for the opening question. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan.
Você quer começar? Boa noite, todos e todas. Agradeço principalmente a
Good
Sonia.
evening, everyone. I thank especially Sonia, who invited me. It's very good to be back here at CIPI. I worked here for a few years, and it's important to be here in such an important topic. I must say that when I was invited, the first thing I thought about was, well, but I'm not in any of the groups or the movements. I don't want to take up space that doesn't really belong to me. However, when I heard that on the table we would only have men, I said, okay, so then I will go because it's important. Because out of these movements, this is the one with less women. We need more women represented. So I invite, we have also Alina here with us to take up this space. Because I'm a teacher, I wrote a text, so I will read it and dialogue with it because there's a lot of things to say.
Então, partindo da pergunta, né, se é possível uma educação judaica.
Starting from the question, I put here a few more letters, LGBTQAP and plus. I start thinking if Judaism is supposed to be based on Tikkun Milan, we have to embrace the issue of LGBTQA+, especially now at this historical moment in which the obvious needs to be reaffirmed every day. I also want to start talking about why so many letters. And when we talk about Jewish education and education in general, it's important to be very welcoming and very careful. A lot of people say, oh, it's a lot of letters. Why do you have to make those up? But what we are talking here is about giving visibility to populations who have been historically excluded and marginalized. It's acknowledgement. We need all of those letters, and as many letters it's necessary, as long as we have a historical moment that needs them. So the first tip in terms of education, look for information. If I don't know any of the letters, look for the information. Today in the internet, you can find everything.
É por aí que eu acho que dos caminhos, né?
I think that's one of the ways forward. I'm sorry, I have to consult my text so that I don't talk too much. Violence directed towards people who are against the heteronormative pattern cannot be accepted, be it for religious region or any other. This is a violence that leaves profound individual and collective marks. In Brazilian psychology, we face the debate of the gay cure. That's about the resolution of the 99th resolution from the Psychologists Council. And the resolution says you cannot have therapy or use psychology for conversion therapy on sexual orientation. But here in Brazil, some people sued to extinguish this resolution. They have not won thus far. So what is the discussion from the psychology point of view? There is no cure for whoever is not sick. The suffering that a person that is not within the standard of heteronormativity feels is not for being who they are or for loving who they love. It's for living in a society where they suffer violence all the time and they are not accepted. So this was the campaign of the Psychology Council. There is no cure for those who are not sick. Thinking about what there is in terms of culture and artistic production, which 2021 that's called Pray Away, that will talk about conversion therapy in the United States. In there, it's very explicit, very clear. What are the consequences of not accepting these people? The subjective consequences of inadequation, shame, self-rejection, blame, self-blame, especially, and many times leading to self-mutilation and even suicide. So again, these people are not suffering because they are who they are. They are suffering because of society. I'm a cisgender Jewish woman. I'm a lesbian. And I was very lucky because I grew up in a family where I was accepted without questioning. but not everyone is that lucky. And that's why education is important. I had a discussion the other day with a friend. He was saying that people talk a lot about sexuality and racism in the school, but some parents don't want that to be discussed, and we have to respect the freedom of this parent. And I said that it cannot be considered a freedom when people are dying on the other side of this debate. This is something very important that we should think as a Jewish community. When you talk about the issue of the policy, for example, it's not just because of an individual desire that this will come up. We have to structure change, and education is a very important, has a very important role to play in that. The other documentary is The Other Amongst Others, and it talks about homophobia in the Jewish community in Buenos Aires. This one is a little bit older, and it talks about how we reproduce what is seen in society, as how we are going to have to take a better look at ourselves if we want to make a difference. I'm almost done. The importance then of educating about LGBTQAP and more is to take care of the safety of our young people. We have to change reality so that world becomes a safe place for everyone. And in order to do that, is essential to educate our whole community as well. So we need content and we need models, but we also need a place for people, not only older people. We have young people following conservative communities, but we need to take care of the community as a whole, thinking who is watching this live, who is really interested in changing their own minds. We need to think of a community structure, in fact, so that this situation may change, especially because we are undergoing a period of backlash in terms of rights. There is a conservative wave all over the world, and people from different ages and contexts have repeated anti scientific, dogmatic discourses. This is violent. This is violence. We need to be firm in our positioning in favor of people LGBTQA PN plus, and also welcome these people and teach what this kind of violence produces in people and society as a whole. So this is the path we have to take with a lot of kind, tenderness, affection, but making sure that this is not acceptable, that we are acting violently towards people, subjectively and objectively. I also added here something that I could not fail to mention, which is the issue of women. Women are subject to violence and even sexual violence. This is a primordial, crucial issue in the violence that is undertaken. And the sexual repression towards the female body is also very strong, even in the LGBTQIA plus. Female sexuality is not researched about IST in lesbian women, for example. People don't talk about that. This is another issue that has to be highlighted in all this discussion. We need to look at it attentively to the subtle violences that invade us and make them free. Now, coming to a close, events such as this one are a great beginning. It's extremely important. Please do watch the contest, the documentary, the films, recommend them to people around you because we end up creating a better common sense. And also research. We need to research more in our community. This documentary, for example, is from 2010. Maybe we can have something related more specifically to Brazil. We have a lot of movements establishing themselves here, and it's important to welcome and dialogue all the time. There is a lot to be done if we really want to repair the world. Thank you, Raizel. Well, first of all, I would like to thank for the invitation. I'm quite nervous to be here among such important people. And well, I will start answering the general question saying that yes, it is very possible. I have several friends who are not Jewish. I studied in a Catholic school. But what the thing that I like best about Judaism is that is a questioning religion, and we always thought that was very important. As Hazel said, it's an important topic, especially in the environment of therapy. We teach people, children to question the world, so this kind of issue will come up. And we're here to talk about the future and the young generation. But unfortunately, I still don't have a very positive answer. Talking about my personal experience, as I said, I studied in Jewish school to high school. Then I went to a Catholic school, and in my university, one third of the students were Jewish. In these two non-Jewish environments is where I found room to talk about sexuality. My school was very open, even being Catholic, and at university, it's very hard to find somebody who is heterosexual. So it's involved in there somehow. So something that I miss a lot is representativity. I was a very curious person. I asked a lot about the love life of my madrihim, and they were always talking about men. So it was not something that came up. But after I joined Adracha, quickly started seeing that some of the madrihim were part of the community, but they had never said anything to anyone. So it took a while until I joined them. I in these two environments that I mentioned, I believe that the room for inviting people in was very different. But this is something that's changing. In Meshwat was the first person that I talked to about my sexuality. At first, I thought I was the only one, but then other people started to open up. So it's very hard to take that first step on coming out of the closet. And if we are not comfortable to talking about that with the madrihim, how are we going to talk about that to the children? However, things are changing right now. And what's most important to me is answering the questions that they ask with truth. Last week, for example, we were at the camp and I had to explain what sex was for 8-year-olds. And I took that opportunity to explain and highlight that it happens between two people from any gender, so long as they are or both consenting. And this is important. This is representativity. They may say this is not enough. It isn't, but it's a very important first step because children, they think everything that we do is wonderful. So if we treat that issue as normal and speaking about that will be much easier. As many people said, a lot of people don't have that space to talk about that. So seeing the example is very important and giving, they ask us a lot of things they are not, they're afraid of asking their parents. So it's very important to talk to the Hanhim about these things as we grow older. So I believe that this space needs to exist and it starts with us, but it's also very important to put this content onwards. When I was in Colombia last year, we were in the process of revising our educational agenda. And one of the models that we have is gender. And I insisted that we put LGBT issues in question because, as Heiser said, they are very connected. And it took us a long time to understand how we were going to discuss that with young children. I even talked to Heiser and I had a lecture with the Madahim and we didn't see how to go forward. It's a lecture to explain what's on in the acronym, and so it was not very inspiring. But the answer that we found was talking to children about things that have to do with the world that they know. So we started doing activities about love, about conception of family, of my body and the body of somebody else. What kind of affection do we like? And with that, you can work differences, and the children have a notion that everything is not as they've known before, right? So making them feel welcome in this space for us was very important. That's how it starts.
Eu elenquei aqui 5 pontos, eu estou pensando
I made a list of 5 topics, and I'm thinking which one of them have already been approached by the colleagues that came before me. If I could start with one of the sentences that I like the most from Paulo Freire. When the education is not geared towards freedom, the dream of the oppressed is to become the oppressor. This is something that we have to think about in any kind of education. In particular, here we're talking about Jewish education, but any education. The school that I chose for my child is School Vera Cruz, which has a project of anti-racist education and deals with the topics, as Daniel said. They're revising the curriculum, they're revising the hiring of professors and everyone in the school, and they are granting scholarships for indigenous and Black descendant children. This model can be thought of as an anti-prejudice educational model. It's anti-racist, but also anti-prejudice model as a whole. I thought a lot about challenges. There is a need of a project for LGBTQA plus inclusion in Jewish education, at least for this public. For this public is a consensus, but I was thinking about the challenges. One of these challenges was the same that other issues of inclusion face in Jewish education. Noah said that she's here to represent, to recognize as a cisgender, middle class, white, 51-year-old subject. The Jewish education that I received did not discuss education. So we have countless generations of Jewish people for whom inclusion is not a dimension of Judaism or Jewish education. They were educated with texts that never stop to think about that. As Rabino Tachi said yesterday, the first chapter of the Torah talks about men and women being created at the same time, simultaneously, the masculine and the feminine. And this has never been highlighted in my Jewish education. In my Jewish education, I never knew that King David had a friend that he loved more than any women, which means they had, if they had a homoaffective relation, it's open to discussion, but this text was not highlighted to me. Or the Leish Lakish and the Kana bathing together in the river and not being able to leave because maybe, I don't know, they were excited. On the other hand, Leviticus 18 that forbids Jewish masculinity, that was mentioned several times. So opening the book and allowing our community to learn what our text tradition has to say about these issues, these are aspects that most of the Jewish community are not attentive to yet. And we have to break this view that if Judaism has anything to say about gender and sexuality, it will be something very square. No, we have to break that prejudice, first of all. The other issue is acknowledging the Jewish community as a diverse community on the political point of view, from the political point of view. And it's an immense positive surprise to see how the Jewish community has seen itself as less monolithic and more diverse. And it's diverse in several other issues in the religious perspectives, and of course, the sexual orientation and gender orientation perspective. This raises possibilities and challenges. As me, cisgender, white, heterosexual person that was educated in a very square Jewish perspective, I would like to highlight, Raizel mentioned the affection and the care that we have to have with people whose historical perspectives are not open for the possibility of a Jewish education that is open to LGBTQI plus issues. So we have to deal with this with affection and care and patience, recognizing the privileges that I have, like from the perspective that I'm speaking to. The victim of oppression, for them, it's much harder to be patient. But for us, from the moment that we recognize that, we have to recognize that sometimes the families that present resistance to issues of sexuality, of inclusion of LGBTQIA+, they need to be part of our explicit and implicit curriculum, not as bad people, but as people who have the privilege. And it's hard to give up privilege as well as anything else. Think about the number of rooms that you have in your house and how many people that live in the city. Imagine if somebody said, we will approve a law that all the houses that have more than 3 rooms will have one less to ensure that everyone who lives on the street has a place to stay. And we would start to have a fit. Oh, but I have children, I need those rooms. It's hard to give up privilege. But we have to understand that people who were raised with a perspective that our color, that our sexuality, our sexual gender orientation, they they are in a certain way, it's hard for them. So we have to treat them with affection, as Raizel said. It is also important to look at what our syllabus say, but it's paramount to look at everything else, at all the rest of the discourse. Raizel said when she was invited, she was the only woman on the panel. On our website, how many people of color are there in the website of SEEP or LGBTQIA plus? Or when we talk about marriage, we always talk about marriage in Jewish tradition, and we talk about the men and women, although we do acknowledge that it could happen between people from the same gender. When we have a form that people have to fill, we have the name of the father and the mother. We have this, all of this counts on the image that we have over the perspective of Judaism in these issues. It's paramount to look at all of that. And it's also crucial that we look at all the opportunities that we have to affirm these issues. So when we talk about gênero, we have to think about the possibility it has of bringing a plurality of gender identity issues. It talks about the rituals of cycle of life. One of the books, one of the children's books that I like the most, talks about Purim superhero. I don't know if you know. Purim is a celebration that talks about the use, among so many things, about the masks that we need to wear to be accepted. It's a story that deals with this issue it's a story of a boy that has two parents, but two parents is not, no, sorry, two fathers, but this is not the center of the story. And we bring examples. We can take that as an example for children who have two fathers or two mothers, or children that were born with a penis but identify as a woman. And we start giving the chance for people who have been educated. It doesn't matter how old they are. It's not just the children that we are educating. People may be 50, 60 years old and so on and still be educated. We have to be sensitive to include people of all ages as well. But the more opportunities we bring for this conversation, more they will take this space in the Jewish community. Well, after these first comments, I would like to open for a conversation so you can comment and ask each other questions. And then we will open for questions and comments from the audience.
Eu tenho comentário para falar sobre
I
uma
do have a
coisa
comment about something that Noah said that I believe it's very important. She brought an example, a very concrete one, about how to talk about sexuality with children, which is a problem that we have of a school without parties, where they say that you cannot discuss sexuality with children at school, ignoring the fact that we need to talk about it. School is a place for social protection. In Brazil, we have a high number of children who are sexually abused, and the place that identifies this abuse is many times the school. And this is when they're talking about their body, about where you can touch, where you can't, what's affection, what is love, what's affection. So I'm very happy to see that you are doing that in that way. That's a good example that it's possible to talk about sexuality, which is not sex, with children, regardless of their age. Education should be a place for dialogue about everything. You cannot have a forbidden topic in school. Something else very important. Children today know. I had this conversation with these children because they had a dream, they talked about it, and I asked, do you know what is sex? And they said, yes, I know. I looked it up in Google. And I say, oh my God, this is the time to intervene because access to internet has changed a lot of things.
In the Rama camps, it's not a choice whether or not we can talk about these issues with children, because there are children who feel comfortable coming out as trans or non-binary or gay or queer. And it's not fair to those kids to make them do the educational work for their peers. So we have to be prepared for that as educators in our setting. We still have a ways to go in learning how to do that. And I think that your example that you shared is a really powerful one. You mentioned the book, The Purim Superhero, which I know. This is a Jewish children's book that is sort of known as one of the first LGBT-themed Jewish children's book. But the story of its release and reception is actually pretty bumpy. The book was published through an organization in the United States called PJ Library that sends Jewish children's books for free to Jewish families who sign up around the United States. It's a really,
they're here as well.
And they're also in Brazil. It's a really remarkable program, and I hope many of your families have benefited from it. When the Purim Superhero was first released about 10 years ago, PJ Library decided not to send that book to everybody for fear of offending certain families. You had to sign up specifically to receive that book. So you could only opt in. And at the time, that decision was very strongly criticized. And of course, I disagreed with it because it's not offensive to get a book about two dads helping their kids celebrate Purim. It's not something that anybody should be ashamed to send. And it was disappointing to see that at the time, PJ Library to make that decision. Now, times have changed a little bit, and the book is included in regular sending out. I should also mention that the book totally sold out, that there were enough specific requests for it, even in 2013. But to add a little more complexity to the story, I was mentioning, and Raizel too, about some of the backlash global to LGBTQ equality. And we're seeing a lot of that in the United States too. There was a school district in Florida just this year that banned the Purim Superhero from their school library for being inappropriate for children. So that's very disappointing. And one more very quick thing. Rogerio was talking about what should be on the syllabus, what should be on the curriculum. And this is a nicer story. I don't know if people know about the tradition on the holiday of Sukkot, to invite ushpizin, or guests, into the sukkah. Traditionally, it was just men like Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. More recently, women have been included as ushpizot to invite Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, Leah also to join the sukkah. This year, an organization called Keshet, based in New York, which is a Jewish LGBTQ education and activism organization, put out queer ushpizim ot. 14 people, men, women, trans, non-binary, Jews from Jewish history, some famous, some less famous, to invite into your sukkah on Sukkot. So I saw this and immediately printed them out and had them laminated to be able to put on the walls of our sukkah this year and every year. And when my husband and I invited the teens of the congregation to join us for a Sukkot meal and a program, what did they see on the walls of the sukkah? They saw these real people, historical LGBTQ Jews who actually existed, who lived lives, who did amazing things, who experienced oppression too, very sadly, and had that front and center as part of their Jewish education. And as more queer people take on these leadership roles in education and figure out how to teach the very rich LGBTQ history and contemporary experience that exists, I think it's gonna change the world too. So thank you for raising both of those, Rogerio.
Só queria amarrar numa coisa que a Noah falou. E aí
I would like to go back to something that Noah said, and then I will comment on what you said and pass on to the public. A few years ago, I was the director of a Jewish school, and a teacher showed me her lesson plan, and the lesson plan had nothing to do with who she was. And I said, "Do you believe that?" And she said, "What do you mean? Do you believe in what you are teaching?" And she said, "But that's what Jewish tradition says." Sometimes in Jewish education, we think that the correct Judaism is the Judaism that we live, but they're not necessarily connected. We think we have to teach the correct quote unquote Judaism, and we say that this. When you said, Noah, that you're madrichim, now that you are madricha, you have discovered that they were part of the LGBTQA plus community. But while you were halicha, they thought it was not appropriate to reveal that to you. And this is something we have to rethink. This concept of what is the appropriate Judaism that will be taught and that you can teach. It's like being a teacher when you go inside the classroom and you say, okay, so what's correct is X, Y, or Z. I cannot show to my students that I'm in a relationship with something that's not Jewish or that I am gay. And then we are perpetuating this perspective of this very stale Judaism that doesn't have room for who we really are. I hope that your Hanishim Mojin can find the real you. That would be the best, so that we can increase the room for each and every one of us as educator, as active Jewish people, so that we can bring the who we are fully and break a little bit the appearance of this makeshift Judaism. Now I have some questions here already. The first one is from Sinoma. She said, "I'm sorry I missed the Heiser presentation, but my question is for her. Don't you think that the low visibility it's a problem, especially in the Jewish circles? Don't you want to ask a few questions and we answer all of them?" No. Bia Goulart ask, "Through the Torah, do we have permission to practice an LGBTQA plus life?" And then Liora asks, "I'm a woman, trans and Jewish, and people still today do not know how to differentiate gender identity and sexuality, but in Talmud we have 6 kinds of. So why does that happen? Can you, I don't know, I think it was identified to Raizel. So I can start answering. I believe that as a whole, the issue of being a lesbian has a kind of visibility because there is a standard in normativity that the body of the woman has to be subjected to men. They say, oh, but being a lesbian is more accepted because they think it's beautiful to see two women kissing, or they don't suffer as much. But there is another side to these issues. That is, what is the standard of lesbian that is accepted? Only the feminine one that is still responding to the desire of men. Women who are more masculine, they suffer a lot and they even suffer violence. I myself, I am a bit standard in terms of femininity, and former partners of mine who are within this standard, there are times in which we feel unsafe walking down the street. This happens, the looks from other people, and sometimes they don't even notice. Women are always afraid. LGBTQ women, oh, we can't have the T, but anyway, the lesbian women, they are always afraid. They're even more afraid than women in general. I believe that within the Jewish community, this is not spoken about, and this is it's not highlighted at all. It doesn't come to the forefront. How many lesbian weddings have we seen in Jewish community? There was one from Rio that went viral on WhatsApp, but apart from that, there is not a lot of space for lesbian leaderships to be discussing that. But in terms of prejudice, I think it's got more towards the more masculinized lesbian who were not servicing the pattern of masculine taste more than those that pass for heterosexual more. I don't know if I answered the question.
So it's a little bit different in the United States. Some of the strongest Jewish leaders we have in the US are out lesbian rabbis, femme and butch. And it really is remarkable to see their leadership. I want to address the question, does the Torah give permission to be LGBTQ+? Was that what I understood? Is that close enough translation? So I am from the Masorti movement, the conservative movement in the United States. And unfortunately, for a long time, including after I was born, the official answer of that movement was no. I think always hiding below the surface, the answer was yes. It just took them a while to come to that answer. And the halachic thinking, the way that they got Jewish law to be more accepting of LGBTQ identity was through the concept of kavod habriot, or human dignity. And in the Teshuvah, the rabbinic responsum that they passed in 2006, which finally allowed for openly gay and lesbian students to become rabbis and set the groundwork for allowing same-sex Jewish weddings, that was the concept that drove the whole Teshuvah. The idea that human dignity and respect for human dignity is more important than almost anything else you could imagine, including any interpretations of prohibitions of homosexual behavior that might be in the Torah. That the idea of kavod habriot is more important than what some of those other pieces have to say. And I'm very glad that the conservative movement got to that point in 2006. In the United States, the Reform and Reconstructionist movements were there earlier. The Orthodox movement is a lot slower. And I would say that a lot of those fights that the conservative movement had 15 years ago are happening right now in a very public way in the modern Orthodox world. I have LGBTQ Orthodox friends who are really risking a lot by coming out. I have friends who are Orthodox rabbis who are both trying to help push LGBTQ equality forward and who are a little more resistant. That's where a lot of these fights in the States are happening right now. But at least from my perspective and from what I believe, the Judaism that I practice 100% says yes.
Queria complementar uma coisa, acho que responde as duas perguntas. Assim, se eu não me engano, para quem
I
gosta
would
de...
like to add something. For those who like to follow the Torah, it says that a man cannot sleep with another man, which means women, we're okay with that. But anyway, that was a joke. What is the role of a lesbian woman in Jewish society according to the Torah? In those times, women were good for having kids and taking care of the kids if they're not going to have kids. So what's the role of this woman? A man, if he is homosexual, he can do a lot of things that are within the normal scope of a man, right? But I found that very curious. What's the role of women? Well, as for the study of the Jewish text and looking at every word and being concerned about every word, and the question is, do we have the permission in the Torah to practice the LGBTQA plus lifestyle? So first we have to understand what's Torah, what's permission, what is practice, what is an LGBTQA plus life, and I mean, in the opinion of whom? So the Torah may be the first few books of the Jewish Bible, the Pentateuch, it could be the whole Tanakh, the whole Hebrew Bible. It could be also the whole Jewish tradition. So in the first few books, it says that a man could not lie with another man in the way that he lays with a woman, but it doesn't talk about female homosexuality. But it does say that you have to stone adulterous women or somebody who doesn't follow the Shabbat, eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, and it says a lot of things. But in a conversation with evangelical students, they say, but don't you think it should follow the Bible at its word? But which word? But you eat shrimp, so they forbid homosexuality, but you eat shrimp. So if you focus in one piece of the story and not in the whole story, at least the Jewish tradition should interpret the Torah as understood as the full Jewish tradition, and these verses would be reinterpreted in the Jewish tradition. So the question is there the possibility of reinterpreting this universe? And this is what Daniel was talking about. In the conservative movement, they reinterpret this universe and they rescue that through the dignity of human beings. And the idea of Tzedel Hukim, which every human being is created as the image of God. If God has created us with our sexual orientation and our gender identity, if we were created like that as the image of God, God has created us simultaneously male and female, according to the first chapter of the Torah. So after that, we have to think about what is permission. Each one of the Jewish movements understand the concept of permission in a different way. The reformist movement thinks that every individual needs to understand their own tradition and establish their own norms by themselves. There is no maximum authority that would authorize or not authorize. What is a life that is LGBTQIA+? What is involved in all of this? These are expressions of affection. We're talking about penetration. It is a life together without sex, or there are several things that need to be raised in the story. And again, every movement will establish different limits for each one of those situations. So now going back to Liora's question, I talk very little about the Talmud and the texts. It's hard to expect that the whole community understand all the technical definitions of all the gender identities that are described in the rabbinical tradition, right? So we do need to increase Jewish education, in particular, including these topics in the Jewish education spaces that we have. And there is a text that I love to teach that is from the Biohanat that are together. One is from Baiano Hill that has, if not a statement, at least an insinuation of some homo-affective relation between them. And when I insinuate that, people are very, very angry at me. Then I insinuate that this is what the text is saying. But why? Because we did not see those texts in our trajectory of Jewish education. So we do need, that's why the community doesn't know, because it was not discussed. I don't know if you would like to say anything else about that. Kelly is saying that I have to start wrapping it up because we've been here for more than an hour. So if anyone wants to add something, ask more questions. I do have a final comment that I would like to make. I think the sentence that you said, Rogerio, I even wrote, patient is a privilege of the oppressor. I think that's very important to know. And it's very important knowing that we, from our perspective of privilege, we have to push things forward. We have to make things happen. There's something that's very strong in the Jewish community, at least I feel that, which is the respect from what has come before, respect to older people, respect to culture, respect to tradition. But we cannot continue acting with violence towards people, justifying that. It's the same as if we want to divide the men and women and not argue about homo-affective unions or do not perform the same-sex union because part of the community is going to be bothered by that. I think we have to have that premise very clear of what we want, and the concept of human dignity makes a lot of sense here. We need to, in fact, make things happen. And I go back to the strength of the movements of the Jewish community that are debating the topic. I forgot to say it in the beginning, but I'm also part of MOV education, where we discuss Jewish education with the young adult groups of SIPI. And some of the things that we discussed here were from the discussions that we had. I represent that group also, which means we have to be kind, but we have to move things forward.
So I guess should we take a question from the audience?
Tem pergunta.
Okay. So she's saying that they've delivered already all the questions.
Oh,
so
okay.
Let's just do the
Fine.
wrap up.
So to wrap up, I just want to quickly mention some of the continuing challenges that we're experiencing in the United States in Jewish LGBTQ equality, some of the challenges and some of the issues. So one is, should LGBTQ Jews organize separately or together in community? There are a number of gay synagogues and gay and queer Jewish organizations in the United States. And at this point, most conservative, Reconstructionist, and Reform synagogues are tripping over themselves to be inclusive of LGBTQ people. And to what extent should we try to integrate? And to what extent should we maintain separate spaces to have conversations that are appropriate, perhaps just for us, or that we feel more comfortable in just as ourselves? A second, and this has come up a few times, what obligation do LGBTQ Jews have towards fighting for the equality of other marginalized groups in society, whether that's people of color or women or people with disabilities, or even within the LGBTQ community, trans and non-binary people? That also is very important and has been a little bit of an active fight in the United States over how much obligation do we have. I personally think it's a considerable, pretty big obligation, but there's some disagreements. A third there's still exclusion in the United States, and not just in the Orthodox world. And especially as we see all of this backlash to LGBTQ equality, are our Jewish organizations speaking out against it and supporting the people in their community? Is the inclusion just like a thin layer at the surface, or does it actually mean something when it's hard? I mentioned this already, but how are we allowing Judaism to be changed thanks to the presence and contribution of LGBTQ people? And then finally, to end on maybe a little more political one, is queerness or LGBTQ identity something that we see as an individual characteristic of a person's identity? Or is it something we see as a political lens to look at the world, to break down binary categories, to fight for social justice? And what does inclusion in the Jewish community mean with those two sometimes similar, but sometimes different and clashing definitions of identity? So that's how I'd like to end. And thank you all for your attention tonight.
Eu queria só refletir pouco nesses desafios que o Daniel.
Talking about these challenges that Daniel mentioned, we do live today in the Brazilian Jewish society with the challenge in some of the dimensions that we are 50 years late, in relation to the Jewish American community. So we are still fighting for the inclusion of women rabbis here in this community. And at the same time, we are fighting for the inclusion of the LGBTQIA plus community at the same time. And all these issues that you have raised, sometimes it's an issue that we face, and others we say, oh, at some point we will think about that. Because today we're still not.
You actually won't be dealing with the issues we're dealing with today, that you'll get to a place where you have them solved and we can learn from you. And with the energy in this room, I think it might be able to happen.
We can learn from each other at least. Então, quero agradecer a cada de vocês que estiveram aqui, a todas as
I would like to thank each and every one of you who are here present, all the entities that made this event possible. In particularly, I would like to thank Leandro, who were involved in helping with Daniel's coming here, Raizel and Kalita, Soninha, that is here with MOV. And I would like to thank each one of you who are also following us at home.